All right, so get ready, because today we're taking a deep dive into the world of information security program development and management. And we've got some really cool source material for this.
Yeah, it's all laid out in a question and answer format, which I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, perfect for our deep dive. We're going to go way beyond just firewalls and passwords.
Mhm.
We're going to explore the why behind all the security measures,
Yeah,
the strategic thinking that goes into a truly effective information security program.
exactly.
Okay, so the first question our source material tackles is, what does security governance actually mean?
Mm.
Because I feel like that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it can be kind of intimidating, right?
Yeah.
Like, does it only apply to huge corporations, or is it relevant for organizations of all sizes?
Well, it's definitely relevant for everyone, no matter the size. Think of it as the framework that makes sure everyone in the organization is working together on security. It's about having clear goals, defining roles and responsibilities, and really making sure everyone understands how their actions impact the overall security of the organization.
So it's not just about, like, having a ton of rules, but more about creating a culture of security awareness.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to make good decisions about security, not just blindly following a checklist.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And that actually leads perfectly into the next question that our source material brings up, which is, what is the purpose of a security policy?
Okay. Yeah.
Now, is that really anything more than just a document that sits on a shelf and gathers dust?
No, it's definitely not. It's a living document, a guide for everyone in the organization. It lays out, acceptable ways to use systems and data,
Okay.
sets expectations for employee behavior, and, just helps create a consistent approach to security across the entire organization.
So it's really like the foundation of a strong security program.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Lays out the ground rules and helps create that culture of accountability.
Gotcha. Speaking of accountability, that leads us to another question of our source material addresses. And that's why it's important to conduct control self-assessments.
Right.
I'll admit that one sounds a little bit uh, bureaucratic to me. Like, isn't it enough to just put the security controls in place?
Well, think of it like getting regular checkups at the doctor. You might feel fine, but those checkups can help catch potential issues early on.
Right.
Control self-assessments, they're all about making sure that our security controls are actually working the way they're supposed to, and that we're constantly improving our defenses.
So it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of checking and adjusting and improving.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So security is constantly evolving, which means our controls have to keep up.
Right. Exactly. Threats change, new vulnerabilities pop up all the time, and self-assessments help us stay on top of all of that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, the next question our source material gets into is something that's super relevant for a lot of businesses these days. And that's, what are the key considerations when it comes to third-party service organizations?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all rely on so many third-party services now, right?
Yeah, for everything.
For everything, from cloud storage to payment processing, you name it. But obviously that introduces some new risks.
Of course, yeah.
So how do we make sure that we're choosing third parties that are handling our data securely?
Well, it's really important to thoroughly vet those third parties, understand their security practices, make sure they align with our own standards.
So it's like we're extending our security perimeter beyond our own walls, basically.
Yeah,
We need to be just as careful about our partner's security as we are about our own.
absolutely. And that includes things like how they handle data, how they respond to incidents, just their overall security posture.
So there's a lot to think about.
There is.
Any advice on a good starting point?
Well, our source material recommends taking a collaborative approach
Oh,
involving legal, procurement, IT departments.
okay.
Legal can help with things like contract negotiations and data handling agreements. Procurement can look into the vendor's financial stability and reputation.
Mm.
And IT can dive deep into those technical security controls.
So it's really about bringing everyone to the table
It is.
to make informed decisions.
Yeah. Making sure that security is just baked into every part of our relationship with those third-party providers.
That's really interesting. So we've covered a lot of ground already. We talked about the importance of security governance, security policies, the complexities of managing third-party risk. But we've got a lot more to unpack, so let's dive into some of those specific security measures and strategies in part two.
Sounds good. So welcome back to our deep dive. As we talk about all this, it's important to remember that security isn't just about one tool or one technology. It's really about, a bunch of different things all working together to address risks from a lot of different angles.
That makes sense. It's like a layered approach.
Exactly. So moving on to the next question, our source material asks, what is the difference between a firewall and an intrusion prevention system?
Okay. Yeah.
Because a lot of people think they're basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. They both seem to be about, like, blocking bad stuff from getting in.
Right. They both play a role in network security, but they work in different ways. Think of a firewall like a gatekeeper checking IDs at the entrance to a building.
Mm,
It looks at basic information about the network traffic, like where it's coming from and where it's going.
okay.
And then it decides whether to let it in or block it based on the rules that have been set up.
So it's like the first line of defense.
Exactly. But a firewall doesn't really look too deeply into the contents of the traffic, and that's where intrusion prevention systems come in. Or IPS. Think of those more like security guards who not only check IDs, but they also, check bags for anything suspicious.
Gotcha.
So they analyze the actual data that's moving through the network. They're looking for patterns that might indicate malicious activity.
Oh, so they're more proactive. They're actually looking for trouble, not just, enforcing basic rules.
Exactly, yeah. An IPS can catch attacks that might slip past a firewall, like, someone trying to exploit a vulnerability in software or sneak in some malware disguised as legitimate traffic.
So that's a really important distinction. And it makes me think about, like, the different layers of security that we need to have in place.
Absolutely.
So what's the next question our source material digs into?
Let's see. The next one is about event monitoring. What's the purpose of that?
Okay, well, that one seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's about keeping an eye on what's happening on our systems, right?
Yeah, that's the basic idea, but it's more than just, passively watching logs go by. Effective event monitoring, it's about actively looking for those little clues, those anomalies that might be a sign that something bad is about to happen.
So like having a detective on the case, constantly searching for those little red flags.
Exactly. We're looking for patterns, trends, anything out of the ordinary. Maybe there's a huge spike in network traffic at a weird time, or a user is trying to get into files they shouldn't be accessing.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that event monitoring can help us spot.
And then we can investigate and, hopefully stop anything bad from happening.
Yeah, ideally before any real damage is done. Early detection is key to minimizing the impact of those security incidents.
Absolutely. The sooner you can respond to a threat, the better.
Exactly.
Done.
Okay, so moving on, the next question our source material asks is, what are vulnerabilities and how do we deal with them?
Okay, yeah, vulnerabilities. I think everyone has heard that word, but maybe not everyone fully understands what it means.
Right. Think of them as weaknesses, in software or hardware. And attackers can use those weaknesses to get into systems or disrupt operations. So vulnerability management, that's the process of identifying those weaknesses, figuring out how serious they are, and then fixing them.
So it's like patching holes in a fence before someone can sneak through.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
But it's not a one-time fix. New vulnerabilities are always being discovered, so it's an ongoing process. You got to constantly be scanning systems, applying patches, staying up to date on the latest threats.
It sounds exhausting, like a never-ending battle.
Yeah, sometimes it feels that way, but it's a battle worth fighting. Effective vulnerability management, it's really crucial for, reducing the risk of successful attacks.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, event monitoring, vulnerability management.
We have.
What other security measures does our source material highlight?
Well, the next question is about web content filters, what role they play in a security program.
Ah, web content filters. Those can be a bit controversial, can't they?
Yeah.
Some people see them as a way for organizations to control what their employees can and can't do on the internet.
Right, and it's important to approach web content filtering carefully. The main goal is to protect the organization and its users from bad stuff online, like malware, phishing sites, dangerous websites.
So it's not about stopping people from using the internet, but more about, like, steering them away from those risky areas.
Exactly. Think of it like putting up guardrails on a winding mountain road. You're not trying to stop people from driving, but you want to make sure they stay on the road.
That's a good analogy. So it's about finding that balance between security and user freedom.
Exactly, yeah. You want to protect users without unnecessarily restricting their access to legitimate websites.
Right, of course. This is all really interesting stuff. We've gotten into some pretty specific security measures now, the things that organizations use to protect their systems and data. But I'm sure there's more to explore, so let's continue our deep dive in part 3. Welcome back to our deep dive. We've been talking about all these different pieces that make up a strong security program, and it's really amazing to see how it all comes together.
Yeah, it really shows that security isn't just a one-time thing you do. It's a process of, figuring out the risks, putting controls in place, and then always adapting as the threats change.
Exactly. And on the topic of adapting, the next question in our source material is about understanding how much security incidents can actually cost a business. It asks, what's the purpose of quantitative risk analysis? I feel like that's something that can easily get overlooked, especially when people are so focused on the technical side of things.
Yeah, and it's really important. Quantitative risk analysis is all about putting a dollar value on the potential consequences of, say, a data breach. So it helps us figure out the financial risks and then make smarter decisions about how much to invest in security.
So is it weighing the costs and benefits of different security measures?
Exactly. If we can quantify how much a data breach could potentially cost, then we can justify spending money on stronger security controls or maybe getting cyber insurance.
Right. That makes sense, especially when budgets are tight and every dollar counts.
Exactly.
Now, the last question in our source material takes us back to something we talked about earlier about documenting risks. It asks, what's the best way to keep track of new risks as they come up?
Well, our source material recommends having a dedicated risk ledger.
Okay.
And that's basically a central place to document all the risks that have been identified. So we can track their status, how bad they could be, and what steps we're taking to address them.
So it's kind of like a living document, right? It changes as our understanding of risks changes.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just a static checklist. It's a tool that helps us actively manage risk.
Gotcha. Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. We've explored so much, from setting up a culture of security awareness to putting those specific technical controls in place and figuring out how to manage risks effectively. I feel like I have a much better understanding of the big picture now.
That's great to hear. And remember, information security is an ongoing process. It takes continuous learning and adapting.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, now that you've been with us on this deep dive, what steps can you take to be safer and more private online? Think about your online habits, your passwords, the security of your devices. Every little thing you do can make a difference. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay secure.